In Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, the narrator turned out to be the murderer. Part of the public that read it reacted like they'd been cheated at cards, and critics called the trick unfair. Within 3 years, the crime writer Ronald Knox had published an actual decalogue of rules for detective fiction, a list of things an author must never do to a reader. Now think about what that reaction assumes. It assumes a narrator telling the truth is the natural state of fiction. So natural that lying required emergency legislation. A century later, the assumption has flipped completely. We now walk into Fight Club, Gone Girl, or Mr. Robot pre-braced for the teller to be lying or broken. A story with a straightforward narrator almost feels naive, and this shift runs far deeper than fashion. The unreliable narrator became our default because we stopped believing any single account of anything, and fiction adjusted its rules to match ours. Why did this narrative device conquer fiction, and what is its dominance doing to the people raised on it? Wayne Booth, a Chicago professor, coined the term unreliable narrator in his 1961 book, The Rhetoric of Fiction. Booth invented the term to describe an exception, as in a special case where the teller's account visibly drifts from what he called the implied author. That's the version of the writer the whole book adds up to. We notice Stevens the butler is deceiving himself in the remains of the day because the novel around him signals it. It's the way a friend's story can contradict itself while the friend stays oblivious. For Booth, this was a delicate instrument, to be used only sparingly. Cinema had already found the instrument's other use a decade before he named it. Kurosawa's Rashomon put 4 incompatible accounts of one crime on screen in 1950 and refused to pick between them. It went on to win the Golden Lion at Venice the following year. Western critics treated that film like a transmission from another planet. Within a generation, the Rashomon effect had escaped cinema entirely. And today, the phrase shows up in legal scholarship and psychology papers about eyewitness disagreement. That tells us how hungry our culture was for a name for that experience. A device Wayne Booth cataloged as a rarity was slowly becoming the century's self-portrait. And then the instrument became the whole orchestra. Tyler Durden turned out to be a hallucination, and Amy Dunn narrated her own faked murder. Mr. Robot pushed it further, with Elliot addressing us directly for a season, and then admitting he'd been hiding his sister from us, which meant hiding her from himself. By the 2000s, the twist narrator had become so standard that audiences started auditing stories in real time, scanning first acts for the lie. The term Booth made for seminar rooms was now in YouTube video titles. We've done the audit ourselves, and we know the exact feeling of watching a narrator and running the background check. There's an explanation for all this that sounds complete. The unreliable narrator won because it's a superior type of storytelling. It generates twists that, in turn, generate word of mouth, and it makes a second viewing feel like a different film, which streaming platforms love because rewatches are free retention. The puzzle box era of Lost and Westworld trained audiences to treat stories as riddles. A lying narrator is the cheapest riddle a writer can make, since the deception needs no sets or effects, only withheld information. Meanwhile, the market built infrastructure around the device, and I find that half of the story more revealing than the twists themselves. Studios now enforce spoiler embargoes with legal weight, and review copies ship with lists of things critics are forbidden to mention. Entire online communities exist to solve shows before their finales, which means the lie has a fan economy. When a narrative device gets its own supply chain, it stops being a technique and becomes a product category. Then this means that the device spread the way any efficient technology spreads, and the culture around it is irrelevant. Fincher just built better mousetraps, and we're just mice with subscriptions. But now that whole craft explanation collapses on one question: why now? Plot twists in stories sold tickets in 1926 too, but Christie was punished for one. So efficiency alone can't explain why the same narrative device moved from scandal to standard practice. Then that means something in the audience changed. The argument that what changed is our knowledge, and that the unreliable narrator won because it's the only true one. Nietzsche wrote in his late notebooks that there are no facts, only interpretations. Every narrator we meet, including the one in our own head, is an interpreter with interests. Modern memory science backs him with data. Booth never had. Elizabeth Loftus showed in her car crash experiments in 1974 that swapping a single verb in a question changed what witnesses remembered seeing. Decades of work since has established that memory is reconstructive, rebuilt at every recall rather than replayed. If every real account of every real event is already distorted, then the reliable narrator is the lie, a fantasy of a view from nowhere. Gone Girl is just realism about testimony. Now this argument is strong, and if it wins, then the shift I'm describing isn't a symptom of anything. Then it means that fiction has moved far from catching a disease, and recovered from one. Trusting a storyteller was always naive, and we finally realize this. But there's a case that pushes back on that argument. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920 ends with a frame story revealing the narrator as an asylum inmate, one of the earliest unreliable narrators on film. According to the critic Siegfried Krakauer, the original script had no such frame, and the writers were furious when it was added. Their story had been a straight attack on murderous authority, but the frame converted the accusation into a madman's delusion. The frame's actual accomplishment was making an inconvenient account easier to dismiss, and honesty about memory had nothing to do with it. And that's the function I can't stop seeing in the wild, because we've all learned to run Caligari's move on each other. Every account can now be reframed as the product of a compromised teller, because witnesses have angles, and institutions are somebody's asylum. Edelman's annual trust surveys have charted the long slide in trust toward media and government. Set across the same decades, the lying narrator became our default one. The device tracks the epistemology of the feed, meaning how we decide what to believe there, where each post comes pre-suspected, and reading means deciding who's deceiving us. Memory science can't take the credit for our suspicious fiction, because suspicion became our resting state first, and stories are where our culture rehearses its reflexes. Think about the last account you fully believed without scanning for the angle, or auditing the storyteller. When your co-worker described the meeting you missed, you adjusted for their grudge. Your friend's account of the breakup got cross-checked against the ex's version you reconstructed on the spot. Then there's the way you retold your own worst moment, with some part of you watching yourself smooth down the rough parts. You're running Booth's method on every human being you know, including yourself. Being told something plainly by someone we don't cross-examine has become almost physically unavailable to us. The prisoners in Plato's cave at least believed their shadows, and we've achieved something stranger. A cave where nobody believes the shadows, the fire, the chains, or the reports of anyone claiming to have seen the sun. Universal suspicion feels like intelligence from the inside. From the outside, it looks like a place where no one can be reached. The unreliable narrator has earned their place. The perspectivists are right that no storyteller stands nowhere, and Elizabeth Loftus is right that memory rebuilds itself. But a tool for testing accounts became a default setting, and those are different things. Booth's readers used suspicion to find the implied author, the truer picture behind the flawed teller, so the doubt had a destination. But our doubt has lost its destination. We suspect the narrator is lying, and the fact check, and the fact checker's funders, and the correction. Then what remains, after all, that suspicion is exhaustion, looking like clarity. A culture that can't trust any single account of anything becomes ungovernable and lonely at the same time. And wisdom never enters into it. Fiction has been showing us that portrait for years, while we praise the twist. The saddest narrator in the modern canon barely lies to the reader at all. Stevens, the butler in The Remains of the Day, gets every fact right. Every date, every duty, and deceives only himself about what his dignity cost him. By the last page, he's an old man on a pier, realizing the story he lived inside was the one he never audited. We became expert readers of everyone else's unreliability. But the narrator we still take at his word, every single day, is the one doing the voiceover in our own head. The liar we made our default was never Tyler Durden.